Immersion. Noun. The action of immersing someone or something in a liquid, or, more accurately relating to video games, a deep mental involvement in something. So, what do you think of when someone calls a game immersive? The most common response would be something along the lines of forgetting that you're playing a game at all, but that isn't necessarily always the case. Immersion in video games is merely the feeling of not wanting to stop playing. Situations where you forget to pay attention to the time, or you can take your mind off real-life problems. Although realism and VR are two very common words in the pursuit of immersion, neither are imperative to the cause and, in some cases, can actually take away from the immersion. Immersion can be split into two segments, the first of these being the engagement of the senses. This is how you take control of the player's senses, and it's part of the immersion that tends to fall under realism and VR. Realism manages to attract the player because it is a relatively new and exciting method of showing off skills in both art design and the power of the hardware. People enjoy playing realistic games for that wow factor, the way that the video game can be manipulated to conform to look like the real world. VR, on the other hand, has both that new technology wow and, due to the nature of the closed system, has complete control over the audio and visual input to the player. VR is a very brute force way of creating immersion by shutting out external light and sound. But that isn't all there is to immersion. Too much realism can cause the player to become bored or uninterested in the game. VR done poorly can cause nausea and headaches as well as strain on the player's eyes. The second way to immerse your player base is create good flow and minimize downtime. By doing this, you are able to keep your players engaged in the story or gameplay. Some examples of immersive elements following these rules are games like Apex, Overwatch, and Detroit Become Human. Detroit Become Human is a good example of engagement using flow, storyline, art design, and sound design to immerse the player in the world. Let's start with the most notable immersive elements. For starters, the game excels at realism. The UI elements are all incorporated into the world under the guise of the android's retinal scanners, and actions you can make have sudden and drastic consequences. It is obvious the developers want you to be connected to the main character by creating an environment that feels logical even if it is imaginary. But also consider the overarching storyline. Each area leads more and more insight into the world in which these characters live. This good use of pacing helps keep the player involved and wanting more. The time flies by as players try to uncover each small interaction that they can. The music and sound is ominous, and the animations are realistic, but what keeps the player playing is the thrill of not knowing what's going to happen next. Games like Apex and Overwatch work by forcing the player to focus. Each game has moments of great stress and paying attention to detail like footsteps. The use of audio cues and visual cues holding important information inherently causes immersion. The player will voluntarily shut out other distractions to gain that advantage. In Apex, the audio is also imperative. The gameplay is built heavily on the ability to determine where the other teams are and how strong they are. Listening to the audio cues, like ability voice lines and the different fire sounds the guns can make, gives you an advantage and lets you know in advance what kind of team you're about to encounter. Wraith capitalizes on this mechanic, also having a whispering voice which helps gives the player information about their surroundings. This is a good use of sound to create immersion without needing realism or VR, as it forces the player to shut out other sounds and focus on the game. Overwatch takes a similar approach to engage the player. The players have no minimap. Audio and visual cues are super important, as Overwatch's abilities are about what makes the game stand out. This means that focus is required to understand what abilities have been used and what are still a threat. The idea of using the audio and visual cues to make the players immerse themselves is a way of forcing immersion through engagement of senses. This creates an environment similar to that of a real battleground where the situation is tense and creating noise can spell disaster. In Apex, the weapon boxes scattered along the map are hotpoints, where players congregate. This helps keep the flow of the game going. Anytime you're standing near a box, you're in danger. This, coupled with the ability to leave a game when your squad gets wiped, means that you can always be playing the game, with virtually no downtime. The use of loot boxes also helps engage the player. Many companies use pseudo-gambling as a technique to draw players in and keep them playing. The use of season passes and virtual content which can be bought induces the sunk cost fallacy, which states, by Arks and Bloomer, that individuals commit the sunk cost fallacy when they continue a behavior or endear as a result of previously invested resources. To summarize, the use of realism in VR to create immersion isn't the whole story, with the engagement of the player being what truly gets them hooked, and the flow what keeps them there.